Hi, my name is Alexa Renna, and this is my motor skill acquisition presentation, and my skill is squatting. So just for a little refresher about squatting, a good squat allows for a person to have the best performance for certain sports skills. A good squat prevents injury by improving balance, strengthening your core and glute muscles, aligning your hips to promote equal muscle strength, and also reinforcing mobility of your ankles, knees, hips, and back. Squat variations are also extremely important, and they allow you to target different muscle groups. There are many variations, including back squats, jump squats, and overhead squats. As mentioned in my last presentation with the squat assessment, squatting is a closed skill, which means it is under conditions that are stable and predictable for the learner. The last presentation, we discussed how to assess an overhead squat. In order to assess, I recommend using a checklist to determine if the performer is doing the squat correctly. It is very important to make certain criteria to assess someone, especially if they are a beginner. I also recommended a video analysis for the learner to see the motions they are doing and correct how he or she moves throughout the squat. This is also an example of augmented feedback. So practice is key to become an expert in squatting. The more time you practice, the better results you will have. And when it comes to squatting, variable practice is the way to go compared to closed practice. So it is really important to realize that plateaus will occur during performance and that modifying an exercise is not a bad thing at all. You also have to be aware it may take a few years or months for someone to get better at something and to finally perfect it. Variable practice is a practice that involves variations to adapt and modify particular skills. It provides the learner the ability to explore and discover their own solutions to a problem. And as I mentioned before, squat variations are very important, and the more variations you know, the easier it will be to squat or perfect the squat. Another form of practice is blocked practice, which is when one skill is practiced over a fixed period of time. Mental practice is also beneficial for squatting, which is cognitive rehearsal of the physical skill without moving around. So blocked practice can be beneficial for squatting since it focuses on the one skill or movement of squatting. It does allow learners to concentrate on the one movement and task at a time and to refine and correct the movement. Mental practice helps your mind train and prepare for how to move your particular skill. Imagery can also come into play with mental practice, which is when a person will vision themselves succeeding in the skill. For squatting, one can practice mental practice and imagery by envisioning that they can squat 100 pounds with a bar or the squat machine with proper form. Thinking about the motion and the possible idea and the possible idea of squatting 100 pounds will motivate the mind and body more. And then I also have this image over here with what that shows physical practice, mental practice with motor imagery and how it affects the brain. And I thought it was really interesting if you want to go ahead and look at that as well. Feedback is also very important in regard to practice. So we have extrinsic versus intrinsic feedback. Intrinsic feedback is what the learner is seeing, hearing, or sensing internally, whereas extrinsic feedback is when a coach will give verbal instruction, demonstrations, watch videos, and give kinematic and kinetic feedback. Feedback is also dependent on the learner, so what might work for someone else may not work for another. Others may prefer verbal feedback, while other people may prefer visual or haptic feedback. And then we also have augmented feedback, which includes all different types of feedback or feedback from an external source. An example of augmented feedback for squatting is an instructor verbally giving the learner feedback about her squat formation after she or he has squatted. As a learner begins to get better at a particular skill, practice and feedback designs tend to change. So in the beginning, practice and feedback are more on the lighter side. For example, instead of starting with variable practice for squatting, an instructor might recommend constant practice, which is very consistent in learning one variation of the skill. This is normally how many beginners learn at the start, and the feedback is more extrinsic than intrinsic. Feedback in this case is also more encouraging and supportive compared to a more professional learner, squatter, or a weight trainer. And I also really like this picture that I included. So you have coordination training, which is movement coordination, movement stability, skill adaptability training, which again, complex training, team-based training. It's getting more into more complex things. Then you have performance training, which is, again, like for a game or for performance, it's going to be more hardcore, I guess the word you could say is, and then you lead to competition. So how I would set up a practice squat session for a beginner. So to start off my practice session with a client or patient who is a beginner, I would probably visually demonstrate the squat while also verbally explaining to them the correct stance or posture needed to perform the skill. The goal will be to perform 3 sets of 10 reps, and we will only perform the squat on a flat ground inside with no weights or resistance. Next, I would make them perform the squat as I video them. After they squat for a few times, I will provide feedback and also show them the video. And then throughout the video, I will pause at certain places where they need improvement in form. This would be an example of constant practice for a beginner as well. I would influence their motivation by being supportive and also giving encouraging words like, "You got this," and just all of that positive feedback I would give to them. For an intermediate learner practice session, I will incorporate variable practice. So I will begin to show them different variations of squatting and also adding more weight or resistance for when they squat. I may also increase reps to 4 or 5 sets of 12 instead of 3 sets of 10, just to push them a little more. I can also change the equipment for my learner and make them squat on certain machines with larger weights. To influence motivation, I will still be encouraging by positive feedback, but also using nonverbal feedback such as clapping or maybe yelling a little bit. For demonstrations, I can demonstrate or show them a video demonstration of someone else lifting heavier weights. And then for intermediate learning, I believe there will be a mix of extrinsic and intrinsic feedback as well, since the learner is getting more skilled with the squat. So how does this correlate to my future career? So I do want to become a physical therapist for my future career. So as a future physical therapist, I believe understanding practice sessions and feedback is extremely important, especially when you're going to be working with patients of all ages. Feedback is very important. And also understanding that different types of feedback works differently for other people. Like one of my patients may prefer verbal feedback compared to visual feedback, and the same thing with demonstrations. Someone may want me to actually show them the movement rather than just verbally telling them what to do. Even now as a physical therapist aide, I have to provide feedback for the patients and also demonstrate certain exercises that they have to perform. The right amount of positive feedback really makes a difference in the way a patient is motivated to perform a certain task, and I see that with my own eyes firsthand with even the patients I deal with as a PT aide. So I do think this is going to be very important for my future career and for any other career that anyone else is looking into, like especially OT or PA. So that is my intake on that. And then this is my source. I use mostly the textbook to find a lot of my information. And then this is my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I found it really interesting, and this whole class was super interesting. I really enjoyed it. And you're such a great professor, so I just wanted to say thank you so much for everything that you do. And that, yeah, your class is awesome. So thank you so much, and thank you for listening, and have a great rest of your summer.